What if the worst moment of your life wasn't the end? Picture this, a cold Utah night. A bedroom door creaks open. A 14-year-old girl wakes to a knife at her throat and a stranger's rasp. Don't make a sound, or I'll kill you and your family. In seconds, Elizabeth Smart, straight-A student musician daughter, vanishes. But here's the twist. For 9 months, she wasn't locked in a basement or buried in a forest. She was paraded down sidewalks, camped in national parks, even seen by strangers, and no one noticed. How does someone disappear while standing right in front of us? Close your eyes. Listen. The clock ticks. A floorboard creaks. Your heartbeat thuds in your ears. That's all you hear until it happens. A hand slams over your mouth. A blade glints in the moonlight. A voice hisses, "Don't move, or I'll kill everyone you love." No scream escapes. No struggle follows. Just silence. And just like that, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart, honor student, harpist, the girl next door, vanishes from her own bedroom. This isn't fiction. It's June 5th, 2002. A quiet Salt Lake City neighborhood where pine trees whisper and porch lights glow. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happens, until it does. By sunrise, the Smart family's world fractures. Police swarm the streets. Neighbors whisper. News vans park like vultures. But Elizabeth is already miles away, trapped in a nightmare no one could have imagined. Because here's the truth they'd soon discover. Elizabeth wasn't taken to a remote cabin or a hidden bunker. She was marched through crowds. She slept under highways. She stood in broad daylight, veiled and terrified, and nobody saw her. How does a girl disappear while walking past us on the street? How does a predator hide in a world of smartphones and surveillance? Elizabeth's story isn't just about a kidnapping. It's about the lies we tell ourselves, that monsters are easy to spot, that darkness can't touch the innocent, that it could never happen here. But what if the real horror isn't the stranger in the shadows? What if it's the one standing right in front of us, smiling? The Smart family home wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary. Nestled in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains, Salt Lake City's leafy streets breathed quiet privilege. Kids rode bikes until dusk. Neighbors borrowed sugar without knocking. And the Smarts, they were the definition of ordinary in the best way. Family dinners, scripture study, Elizabeth practicing her harp until the notes floated through the halls like a lullaby. But ordinary doesn't stop evil. It invites it. June 5th, 2002, 1:20 a.m. Most of the Smarts are asleep, except Elizabeth's younger sister, Mary Catherine. 9 years old, curled under a pastel quilt, she hears it first, the groan of a window sliding open. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate. A figure emerges, backlit by the moon, a gaunt man in a salt and pepper beard clutching a knife. His name? Brian David Mitchell. A drifter. A thief. A self-anointed prophet who believed God commanded him to take 7 wives. And tonight, he'd chosen Elizabeth. Mary Catherine would later tell police she stopped breathing as Mitchell leaned over Elizabeth's bed, his voice a serpent's whisper. "Come with me or I'll kill you and your family." No struggle, no cry, just the muffled shuffle of bare feet on carpet as he led Elizabeth, clad only in red pajamas, into the cold Utah night. Mary Catherine waited, paralyzed, for what felt like hours before waking her parents. But here's what chills me. Mitchell didn't sprint into the shadows. He strolled. He'd studied the Smarts' routines, knew their windows were unlocked, calculated every second. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a sacrament to him. And as the Smart family dialed 911, Mitchell was already reciting twisted scripture to Elizabeth in the woods, baptizing her as his celestial bride. We want to believe monsters are clumsy, desperate, human, but Mitchell wasn't. He was a predator in a prophet's robes, and his greatest weapon wasn't the knife. It was the Smarts' own trust in the world. Because who would ever imagine this? By sunrise, Salt Lake City was a city under siege. Helicopters circled the mountains. Police dogs sniffed through backyards. Volunteers in neon vests combed every trail, creek, and ditch. Elizabeth Smart wasn't just a missing girl. She was everyone's daughter. Yellow ribbons wrapped around trees. Candlelight vigils glowed in parks. Even celebrities like Oprah and Dr. Phil begged for tips on national TV. For a moment, it felt like the whole country was holding its breath, waiting for a miracle. But miracles don't work on deadlines. Day 1 became day 10, then day 30. The search radius widened: California, Mexico, Canada. Psychics mailed handwritten letters to the Smarts, claiming Elizabeth was trapped in a barn, a basement, a cult compound. None of it led anywhere. And slowly, the mood shifted. The candles burned out. The headlines turned cynical. Did Elizabeth run away? Tabloids sneered. Was this a family cover-up? Talk shows hissed. The Smarts weren't just grieving, they were on trial. The worst rumor? That Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart, was involved. Why? Because he was too calm on TV. Because he owned a construction company and maybe owed money. Because the world couldn't accept a simpler truth. Sometimes, evil just walks in. Meanwhile, the FBI dug deeper. They traced Mitchell's past, a homeless street preacher with a messiah complex. His wife, Wanda Barzee, followed him like a ghost, silent and obedient. Together, they'd crafted a sick fantasy. God had ordered Mitchell to kidnap 7 wives, starting with Elizabeth. They called their plan the Book of Emmanuel David Isaiah, scribbling prophecies in dollar store notebooks. But here's what baffled agents. Mitchell wasn't hiding. He was camping, right in the Utah wilderness. In July 2002, a hiker spotted Mitchell, Barzee, and a veiled girl near a reservoir. He reported it. Police arrived and found nothing. Why? Mitchell had disguised Elizabeth in a gray wig, sunglasses, and a robe. He'd renamed her Augustine and told bystanders she was his deaf, mute daughter. And they believed him, because who would question a sad, scruffy man and his family? Back in Salt Lake City, the Smarts crumbled. Elizabeth's mom, Lois, slept with her daughter's sweater clutched to her chest. Ed Smart stopped eating. Mary Catherine, the little sister who'd witnessed the kidnapping, stopped speaking altogether. The FBI urged them to stay quiet to avoid complicating the investigation. But the public saw their silence as guilt. By winter, the case went ice cold. Snow buried the mountains. Tip lines went dead. The Smarts spent Christmas staring at Elizabeth's empty chair, her harp gathering dust in the corner. The nation moved on. But Mitchell? He grew bolder. He dragged Elizabeth to California, then back to Utah, sneaking into suburban libraries to read news about himself. He'd point to headlines and smirk. See? They'll never find us. And he was right, until he wasn't. In March 2003, 9 months after the kidnapping, a couple in Sandy, Utah, spotted Mitchell walking with 2 veiled women. One looked off. Too young. Too stiff. The wife muttered, "That's the guy from the news." Her husband called 911. When cops arrived, they shouted a name the world hadn't heard in nearly a year. "Elizabeth?" She froze. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, "Yes, that's me." The rescue made headlines, but the truth was uglier. Mitchell and Barzee had been hiding in plain sight the entire time, begging for money outside supermarkets, hitchhiking on highways, even attending a public rally with Elizabeth in disguise. Hundreds had seen them. No one saw them. The Smarts' nightmare was over. But the questions lingered. How did a homeless madman outwit an entire nation? Why did we blame the family instead of the monster? And what does it say about us that we'd rather believe a conspiracy than admit we failed to protect a child? Elizabeth survived. The system didn't. Elizabeth Smart's nightmare wasn't a locked room. It wasn't a dungeon. Her prison had no walls, no bars, just the suffocating grip of fear. For 9 months, she existed in a twilight world where the rules of reality warped. Brian David Mitchell didn't just kidnap her. He rewired her mind. It started in the mountains. Mitchell dragged Elizabeth into the freezing Utah wilderness, forcing her to hike for miles in nothing but red pajamas. When her feet bled, he gave her stolen hiking boots 2 sizes too big. When she shivered, he wrapped her in a tarp. But the cold wasn't the worst part. It was the lies. Mitchell and Wanda Barzee preached like twisted angels. They told Elizabeth her family had sold her for drug money, that God had chosen her to be Mitchell's wife, that if she screamed, fought, or even thought of escaping, she'd burn in hell. And Elizabeth? She was 14, a believer, a girl raised to trust adults. So she stayed silent. But Mitchell's greatest trick wasn't brainwashing, it was invisibility. He dressed Elizabeth in gray wigs, veils, and sunglasses. He renamed her Augustine and ordered her to act deaf and mute. Then he paraded her through crowds. They slept under highway overpasses, panhandled outside supermarkets, even hitchhiked with strangers. Once a family offered them a ride and asked, "Who's the girl?" Mitchell smiled. "My daughter. Poor thing can't hear a word you say." The family nodded and drove off. Elizabeth's days blurred into a script. Wake up. Chant Mitchell's made-up scriptures. Walk. Hide. Repeat. He starved her for disobedience, once forcing her to go 3 days without food. He assaulted her nightly, warning that demons would drag her to hell if she resisted. Barzy watched, blank-faced, scrubbing Elizabeth's clothes afterward like it was just another chore. But here's what Mitchell never grasped. Elizabeth's mind was her secret weapon. Outwardly, she played the obedient wife. Inwardly, she plotted. She memorized license plates of cars that passed them. She eavesdropped on Mitchell's rants about moving to California. She tracked the moon's phases to guess how much time had passed. And when the despair swallowed her, she'd replay a single memory, her mother's voice, singing her to sleep. One day, Mitchell took a horrifying risk. He marched Elizabeth into a public library, sat her at a computer, and Googled himself. Headlines screamed, "Search for Elizabeth Smart intensifies." He grinned, pointing at the screen. "See? They'll never find us. You're mine now." Elizabeth stared at her own face on the monitor, a missing poster from what felt like another life. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Inside, she repeated her silent mantra, "I will survive. I will go home." The closest she came to freedom? A hike near a reservoir. A group of teenagers spotted Mitchell's camp and reported it. Police arrived, but Mitchell hid Elizabeth under a pile of blankets, telling officers she was his sick daughter. They left. No questions. No search. Elizabeth lay still, listening to the cops' footsteps fade. That night, Mitchell celebrated by reciting psalms. Elizabeth stared at the stars, counting them until her eyes burned. Winter came. Mitchell's revelations grew wilder. He claimed God wanted them to starve to death on a mountain. Elizabeth ate snow to stay alive. Then, suddenly, he changed course. They'd hitchhiked to California. For weeks, they wandered homeless encampments, blending into the chaos. Elizabeth kept her head down, but her eyes never stopped scanning faces. "Someone will see me," she thought. "Someone has to." But no one did. Even when they returned to Utah, even when they walked past newsstands plastered with Elizabeth's face, no one looked twice. Mitchell's disguises were flimsy, a wig, a robe, but his confidence was armor. He knew the truth. People see what they want to see. A scruffy homeless man, a shy disabled daughter. Nothing more. By March 2003, Elizabeth's body was breaking. Her hair matted. Her ribs jutted under her robe. Mitchell's rants grew sloppier, his grip on the delusion slipping. And then, on a sunny afternoon in Sandy, Utah, a woman named Stacy noticed something odd. A man in a beard, two veiled women, walking down the sidewalk. One woman looked young. Too young. Stacy called 911. When police surrounded them, Mitchell tried his old trick. "She's my daughter. She's deaf." But this time, an officer stepped close. "Elizabeth? Is that you?" For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then, softly, "Yes, I'm Elizabeth." Mitchell screamed scripture as they handcuffed him. Barzy stared at the ground. Elizabeth stood frozen, tears carving lines through 9 months of dirt. Later, she'd tell detectives about the license plates, the library, the reservoir. But one question haunted everyone. How did we miss her? The answer's ugly. We see homelessness and look away. We see odd couples and assume family. We see veils and think culture, not chains. Elizabeth's prison wasn't built by Mitchell. It was built by our own blindness. Yet Elizabeth's defiance, quiet, relentless, is the light in this darkness. She didn't just survive. She outsmarted her captors in plain sight. She proved that even in hell, hope is a choice. And sometimes the strongest walls are the ones we build in our minds. March 12, 2003. Sandy, Utah. A crisp, blue sky day. The kind of day where everything feels ordinary, until it doesn't. A man named Howard and his wife, Stacy, were driving home when they spotted 3 figures walking along the sidewalk. A bearded man in a dusty trench coat. 2 women draped in white veils, faces hidden. Nothing unusual, except for one detail. The smaller woman shuffled like a puppet, her steps too stiff, too forced. Stacy squinted. "That girl, she looks familiar." Howard pulled over. They'd seen Mitchell's sketch on the news months earlier. The beard, the wild eyes, the prophet who'd vanished with Elizabeth Smart. Stacy's hands trembled as she dialed 911. I think we just saw him." Within minutes, police cars swarmed the street. Officers leapt out, guns drawn, shouting, "Brian Mitchell, put your hands up." Mitchell froze, then raised his arms, grinning like a martyr. The veiled women stood motionless. One officer stepped closer, his voice cracking. "Elizabeth? Elizabeth Smart? Is that you?" Silence. Then a whisper. "Yes, that's me." The officer gently lifted the veil. Beneath it, a gaunt, pale face. Hollow cheeks, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Elizabeth Smart was 15 now. She'd grown 3 inches. Her once glossy hair hung in greasy clumps. But she was alive. Mitchell snarled scripture as they cuffed him. "I am the servant of God. This is my wife." Barzy stared at the ground, silent. Elizabeth didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just stood there, trembling, as if the world might dissolve if she moved. The officers wrapped her in a blanket. One asked softly, "Do you know who we are?" Elizabeth nodded. "You're here to save me. The rescue that should have come sooner." Back at the police station, detectives struggled to process the truth. For 9 months, Mitchell had dragged Elizabeth across 15 states. They'd slept in tents, panhandled in Las Vegas, hitchhiked with truckers. They'd even attended a public rally with Elizabeth in disguise, just miles from her home. Hundreds of people had seen them. No one saw them. Why? Because Mitchell weaponized our assumptions. A homeless man with a disabled daughter? A sad, silent girl in a veil? We look away. We don't ask questions. We tell ourselves, "Not my business." Even when a hiker found Mitchell's camp months earlier, police dismissed it. Just another drifter. When a librarian reported Mitchell acting suspiciously, they shrugged. He's harmless. Elizabeth was right there, starving, bruised, screaming inside. And we missed her. But Howard and Stacy, they didn't just look. They saw. Maybe it was the way Elizabeth's shoulders hunched. Maybe it was Mitchell's smirk, too smug for a homeless father. Whatever it was, they acted. And because of them, Elizabeth's nightmare ended on a sunny sidewalk in broad daylight. The aftermath, a broken system, a warrior's heart at the hospital, doctors checked Elizabeth's frail body. Bruises, scars, malnutrition. But her mind, still hers. She recounted every license plate, every campsite, every twisted sermon Mitchell preached. Detectives wept as she spoke. The Smarts rushed to the hospital. Lois collapsed when she saw Elizabeth, clutching her daughter's face. "You're real. You're real." Ed Smart, once accused of murdering his own child, held her for an hour without letting go. Mary Catherine, the little sister who'd lived in silence, finally spoke. "I knew you'd come back." But the world wasn't done hurting Elizabeth. Media vultures camped outside her house. Conspiracy theorists claimed she'd staged the kidnapping. Strangers wrote letters calling her a sinner for not escaping sooner. Meanwhile, Mitchell smirked through his trial, singing hymns in court. Barzy, his hollow-eyed shadow, took a plea deal. Elizabeth faced them both, her voice steady. "You took 9 months of my life. You will never take another day." The unanswered question, Elizabeth's rescue, should have been a triumph. Instead, it exposed a gaping hole in how we search for the missing. Amber Alerts? They didn't exist in 2002. Police protocols for child abductions? Shockingly lax. And the public? We're quick to blame families, slow to doubt strangers. Elizabeth's case changed laws, sparked reforms, and gave us tools like the Amber Alert system. But it also forced us to ask, why did it take a miracle? Because that's what this was, a miracle. Not divine intervention, but the fragile power of one couple's attention. Howard and Stacy weren't heroes. They were ordinary people who chose to see. Elizabeth rebuilt her life. She became an advocate, a mother, a voice for the voiceless. But her story isn't just about survival. It's a warning. Predators like Mitchell don't hide in shadows. They hide in our indifference. So the next time you see something off, a glance too fearful, a smile too forced, don't look away. Ask. Act. Because not every victim gets a sidewalk rescue. Not every monster slips up. And the next Elizabeth Smart? She's counting on you to see her. What does a survivor look like? Is it the girl on the news, trembling under a blanket? Or is it the woman in a courtroom decades later, staring down her tormentor, voice unshaken as she says, "You will never define me"? Elizabeth Smart chose to be both. Her story didn't end on the day she was rescued. It began. While the world celebrated her as a miracle, Elizabeth faced a new battle, reclaiming her life. Therapy, nightmares, the crushing weight of being called Lucky Liz, as if surviving made the horror optional. But Elizabeth refused to let trauma write her ending. Instead, she rewrote the rules. At 19, she lobbied Congress for the PROTECT Act, a law to track predators who use the internet to target kids. At 25, she launched the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, teaching survivors of abuse how to heal. At 30, she stood beside the #MeToo movement, reminding the world that coercion isn't love, it's violence. She turned her pain into a weapon, and she aimed it squarely at the systems that failed her. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Elizabeth's happy ending is the exception, not the rule. For every Amber Alert that blares on our phones, a system her case helped create. There are thousands of children who vanish without a sound. Kids like Alicia Navarro, who disappeared in 2019 and resurfaced years later, brainwashed and defending her abductor. Or Dulce Maria Alaves, snatched from a playground in 2019 and never seen again. Why do we remember Elizabeth? Because she lived. Because she spoke. Because we need to believe the good guys win. But what about the ones who don't? Elizabeth's case exposed our blind spots. We think trafficking happens in dark alleys, but it thrives in suburbs, churches, and Target parking lots. We think victims fight back, but trauma paralyzes. We think monsters look like monsters, but they look like Brian David Mitchell, a sad, scruffy man quoting the Bible. Elizabeth taught us that evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. No one will believe you. And yet, her greatest lesson isn't about fear. It's about power. When Elizabeth testified against Mitchell in court, she didn't scream or sob. She spoke calmly, detailing every assault, every threat, every night she prayed to die. The prosecutor asked, "Why didn't you run?" Her answer silenced the room. Would you? If you believed your family was dead? If you thought God would damn you? That moment wasn't just a confession. It was a mirror. How many of us, trapped in invisible cages, abusive relationships, addictions, shame, play along to survive? How many of us mistake silence for safety? Elizabeth's legacy isn't a fairy tale. It's a rebellion. She used her visibility to shine a light on the forgotten. The kids who don't make headlines, the women dismissed as runaways, the victims blamed for their own pain. She forced us to ask, why do we judge the traumatized instead of the predators? Why do we look away when the truth is ugly? But here's the twist. Elizabeth's story isn't over. Every time a parent teaches their child to scream, "You're not my dad," if they're grabbed in public, that's her influence. Every time a cop takes a homeless teen's story seriously, that's her fight. Every time a survivor speaks up, refusing to be a perfect victim, that's her voice. So yes, Elizabeth Smart survived. But more importantly, she refused to disappear. And in a world that still silences the broken, that's not just courage. It's a revolution. Elizabeth Smart's nightmare ended on a sunny street in March 2003. But her story, it never really leaves us. It lingers in the quiet moments, when you double-check the lock on your door, when you watch a stranger a little too closely at the park, when you wonder, could that happen here? To me, we tell ourselves monsters are easy to spot. They lurk in alleyways. They snarl in the dark. But Elizabeth's monster quoted scripture. He begged for spare change. He smiled at cops and said, "God bless you." And that's the terrifying truth her survival forces us to confront. Evil doesn't always look evil. It looks ordinary. It looks human. So let me ask you this. What would you do if your ordinary day turned into a nightmare? If someone you trusted, a neighbor, a teacher, a friend, told you everyone you loved was gone, and the only way to survive was to obey? Would you fight? Would you run? Or would you, like Elizabeth, play along, while secretly counting the stars, memorizing road signs, clinging to the faintest hope that someone somewhere was still looking for you? Elizabeth's story isn't just about abduction. It's about the lies we tell ourselves to feel safe. That bad things only happen to other people. That victims are weak or foolish or somehow deserved it. That if we just lock our doors, teach our kids to scream, and plaster the world with Amber Alerts, we'll be protected. But Elizabeth's captors didn't pick locks. They picked her mind, and no alarm system can shield us from that. Yet here's the light in the darkness. Elizabeth didn't just survive, she redefined survival. She stood in courtrooms and said, "This is what happened to me," knowing the world would dissect her trauma like a crime scene. She married, had children, and hung a harp in her living room. Not to forget the past, but to prove the past didn't own her. She turned her pain into a lighthouse for others lost in the storm, whispering, "Keep going." The night doesn't last forever. But what about the ones who don't come home? The ones whose faces fade from milk cartons, whose cases grow dusty in police archives. Elizabeth's miracle rescue gave us closure, but it also gave us guilt. Why her? Why not the thousands of others? Why do we look at a homeless man with a veiled girl and think family instead of abduction? The answer is uncomfortable. We see what we want to see. We ignore the cracks in the world because fixing them feels too hard, too big. But Elizabeth's legacy is a challenge, to stare into those cracks and act. To ask the grocery store cashier, "Are you okay?" when her smile doesn't reach her eyes. To call 911 when a child's laugh sounds too forced. To stop telling survivors, "Move on," and start asking, "How can I help you heal?" Elizabeth Smart refused to disappear. But her story asks us to do something harder, to notice. To see the veiled girl in the supermarket, the quiet coworker with the flinch, the friend who cancels plans again and again. To realize that heroes aren't born in grand moments, they're made in small ones. A glance, a question, a choice to care when it's easier to look away. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, listen. The wind in the trees, the creak of the house settling, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear it. The whisper of all the Elizabeth Smarts still out there, waiting for someone to see them, waiting for someone to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." The nightmare ended, but the lesson remains. Monsters walk among us. But so do miracles. Stay aware. Stay safe.